Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down a large winter storm that'll be impacting the Northeast over the next few days. We'll also be talking about another massive storm that'll impact almost the entire country as we head into later this week with severe weather and another winter storm. I'll give you the latest breakdown on both of these storms and more in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States today. Beginning with the Northeast, which is where we're watching for a nor'easter to be developing over the next 12 to 24 hours. This is all associated with a band of showers and storms that actually were severe yesterday that brought a couple of tornadoes along with a ton of damaging wind reports to the southeast. Now, this is becoming a low pressure system just off the coast of North Carolina and Virginia. This will eventually become a nor'easter over the next 12 to 24 hours, bringing a ton of snow along with very high winds to the northeast. We're also watching the atmospheric rivers continue back over in California. Our next storm that'll bring severe weather to the southern plains, along with the threat for a winter storm in the Midwest, is currently coming towards California. This will be what we're watching going into mid this week. I'll talk about more on this here in just a moment. Let's talk about the watches and warnings across the country, a few of which may be a surprise to you because we actually have freeze warnings in effect for those back down in areas like Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. You can see here, those are your dark purple boxes there. That is where our freeze warnings are in effect. That is from the behind remnants of that low pressure system that's about to eventually be a nor'easter over the next 24 hours, which is why we now have winter storm warnings in effect for parts of the Northeast. It all kind of matches up with each other, but a few of you may be shocked because we're in mid-March now. You'd think we're getting close to spring, right? Well, we have a couple of more weeks, most likely, of some wintry type weather before we finally get closer to spring-like weather here across the United States. So over the next 12 to 24 hours, we'll watch that low pressure system really intensify over the Northeast. This will bring very high wind gusts along with the threat for upwards of feet of snow in some areas. More details on that here in just a moment. Once we go into next week, though, closer to Thursday into Friday, watch this closely. We have a very strong storm that could develop over the central United States. This could bring severe weather to the southern plains and the lower Mississippi Valley, and eventually the potential for another winter storm across areas in the Midwest and as well as the northern plains. This will eventually move into the Northeast, most likely going into Saturday, and much colder air will come from behind that. We could be talking about below freezing temperatures as far south as Texas. Again, more specific details here in just a moment, but let's first talk about the big nor'easter. As we go into tonight, we'll be watching for the threat of snow really ramping up. You can see across areas in the higher elevations in New England, so back west of Worcester as well as west of Boston, Massachusetts. This is where we'll be watching for some heavier snowfall to begin to ramp up in those higher elevations, so the hill areas there across areas like Connecticut back through Massachusetts. Eventually going into the overnight hours, that snow really ramps up. It's going to be heavy, so it will accumulate pretty quickly. We could be talking about 2 to 3 inches per hour of snow in some areas. Once we get to Tuesday morning, snow will continue. That low pressure system will be down as low as 980 millibars just off the coast of Boston as well as near Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Eventually going into the afternoon and evening hours on Tuesday, we'll still be watching for some snow, but it will become a bit more scattered in nature, so it won't be completely widespread and heavy, but we will still be watching for the threat of some heavy bands of snow. But again, it'll be a bit more scattered by then. By Wednesday morning, we'll be talking about at least some light to moderate snow that's going to be more isolated. This should all move out most likely as we head into later Wednesday, so it really is mainly going to be a Monday night through Tuesday event with some snow still remaining going into Wednesday. In terms of accumulation, we'll be watching a few areas in particular for some very hefty snowfall accumulation, especially in southern Vermont back through western Massachusetts. Again, in the hills regions, this is where we could see the threat for the most significant snowfall accumulation. Some areas could see upwards of 1 to 2 feet. Areas near Boston, for example, probably going to be somewhere between 3 to 6 inches. This is a little bit of a closer view at it. So Albany right now estimated to be somewhere around a foot of snow, at least from the HRR model. Back through areas in Connecticut, it will vary anywhere from a coating along the coastline back up to the north in the hills areas. Upwards of 1 to 2 feet is possible. So there will be a massive difference in terms of snowfall accumulation. Wind gusts will also be a huge concern. Power outages will be possible, especially near Cape Cod and Barnstable unstable. This is where we'll be watching for wind gusts upwards of 50 to 60 miles per hour as we go throughout Tuesday, and eventually even into Tuesday evening. By the way, look back over here near areas like Essex, Massachusetts. That is where we could see wind gusts upwards of 60 miles per hour as well. So the east coast there of Massachusetts definitely going to see the brunt of the worst wind gusts, even into the overnight hours Wednesday, behind that low pressure system. Here's your low pressure system here. Those are your strong wind gusts ushering in from the northern side here of that low pressure system. That will be a really big concern as we go into Wednesday morning. Eventually the wind gusts will die down slowly throughout Wednesday, but we'll probably see some blowing snow, potentially some blizzard conditions as well across areas in New England. Now let's talk about that severe weather potential for Thursday. Yes, severe weather is returning. In fact, we are very close to spring. March is when the stuff really starts to ramp up, especially in the southern plains, but there is a slight risk for severe weather that has been issued by the Storm Prediction Center. Honestly, I would not be surprised if this does get upgraded to an enhanced risk as early as tomorrow. The threat does seem to be increasing with this event. This will primarily be across North Texas back through Oklahoma, as well as into areas like Louisiana and Arkansas. Main concerns do seem to be damaging winds, large hail, a few tornadoes, all going to be possible here across the southern plains as we head into Thursday. Now, I'm going to break it down a little bit more specifically here in just a moment, but let's take a bit more of a broad look because there's a couple different parts to this storm that I mentioned a little bit earlier in this forecast, one of which will be the threat for a winter storm. This will be back up in the northern plains. Here's your snow that will begin probably Thursday afternoon. Back down in the southern plains, that's where we'll be watching for the threat for some storms to fire up in terms of some severe weather. So going into late Thursday into Friday, storms fire up. We could see severe weather as far north as areas like Missouri. Eventually going through Friday afternoon and evening, storms will continue to move into the southeast. We may still see some severe weather over that direction, but one big issue will be the instability. How much instability will actually be available? Bit of a question mark right now, but it doesn't seem to be much, so that should limit the severe weather threat that direction. But for the southern plains, as we go into Thursday around lunchtime or so, storms will begin to fire up across Oklahoma back through North Texas. These could all produce all modes of severe weather. Again, damaging winds is definitely going to be the main concern, but large hail and a few tornadoes are still possible. Going through the overnight hours Thursday night into Friday morning, that storm activity will shift to the south and east. Isolated severe weather possible across the Gulf Coast going into Friday morning. Again, more specific details on this event in my next forecast, which will be tomorrow. In terms of instability values here across Texas and as well as Oklahoma, again, you can notice here, this is where our highest instability will be, upwards of 1,000 to 1,500 joules per kilogram. This is where we'll be watching for some of the greatest severe weather threat Thursday afternoon. So it does seem to be more of an afternoon and evening threat in terms of this severe weather event, not necessarily as much as a overnight threat. Back through the southeast and as well as going to Louisiana, the instability is much less, but we could still see some isolated severe weather down that direction. And winter is not over yet. The Climate Prediction Center is forecasting nearly the entire country to have below average temperatures from Saturday through next Wednesday. And a big reason why is because we'll have one cold blast this week and then another big cold blast going into this weekend. I'll have more details on both of these in our next forecast. Make sure to subscribe down below and turn on post notifications. This forecast is brought to you by Platinum Contracting.